So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second of the 13 webinars that are part of the 2020 IMOS webinars program. My name is Caterina Giusti. I'm professor of statistics at the University of Pisa in Italy, where this session is hosted. Today, I will also act as the webinar facilitator. Let me first explain for any newcomers that IMOS stands for the European Master in Official Statistics, a joint project of university and data producers in the EU member states, EFTA and EU candidate countries. If your university is interested in applying for the IMOS label, please consider that a permanently open call for universities is available on the IMOS dedicated page on the Eurostat website. For staying in contact with the IMOS news and community, please follow the IMOS on Twitter. The IMOS account is @EU_IMOS. I just would like to add that the recording of the first webinar, What is a Trusted Math Statistics, is available on the IMOS 2020 events website, and the recording also includes the opening address by Mariana Kotseva, Eurostat Director General. Now, before I give the floor to our speaker, let me first briefly explain how we run the webinar today. As a participant, you can watch and listen to the session. To interact with the presenter, you can use the chat, which is represented by the comic symbol. We encourage you to prepare your question and pose them to the presenter during the presentation or at the question breaks. We will have indeed some question breaks and also final discussion so that the presenter can reply to your questions. Should you have any technical problem, please try to restart the Skype for Business or the computer or device that you are using. For more specific technical questions, you can use the chat and you will receive a personal reply. In any case, please consider that the slides of the presentation are already available on the IMOS 2020 events website. So today I have a great pleasure to host Gustavo Moraga from Ghent University. Gustavo Moraga is a researcher at the Department of Chemistry and Technology from Ghent University. His PhD project aims to develop indicators to assess circularity in products. Gustavo has experienced his quantitative sustainability assessments with a life cycle perspective for clean production. Before his master's degrees, Gustavo worked for more than 5 years with consultancy for sustainability in buildings using thermoenergetic modeling to improve operational energy use. Today, he will speak about circular economy, how to measure where we have no measure, a really interesting topic which I think is not so well covered in many of our master's degree courses. So Gustavo, the floor is yours until the first question break.
Okay, thank you, Caterina, for the introduction. So, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Good. So, circular economy, how to measure when we have no measure. First, just as an outline, I will present then the Circular Economy Policy Research Center is the research center that I'm based within the Ghent University, and the content part will be then the circular economy indicators. What do they measure? It was a paper that I will show later. So the Circular Economy Policy Research Center is a consortium between some Flemish to measure or to promote circular economy, especially giving advices to policy. Why this Policy Research Center? Well, the Flemish government has some aims related to the transition to circular economy with the minimal use of materials, energy, and space, and also the minimal environmental impact. And then they create some policy questions that would be how to measure the progress of circular economy with a monitor, which policy instruments contribute best to this transition with stimulation, and then the impact of novel trends in circular economy. This is a contextualization issue. For that, they created 8 research lines. I am based on the first one, so development of indicators for circularity, and then this, I will try to use the pointer here, and then, yeah, I think you can see now, and then this research line is related to indicators and monitoring. If you want to know more about the Policy Research Center, you can enter in our website, ce-center.be. So the content part, circular economy indicators, what do they measure? This is based on a scientific paper that was the first output from my PhD research. And it was a collaboration in between the Policy Research Center and the Joint Research Center from the European Commission. I know that many of you are not so well familiarized with circular economy as a concept, so I'll try to cover a little bit what it means. This was actually the first question that we faced. What is circular economy? Because it's a very dense and not so easy to grasp concept. One easy definition is from the European Commission, from the European Action Plan for Circular Economy, where they say that it's an economy where the value of products, material, and resources is maintained for as long as possible, and the generation of waste is minimized. Meaning that for them, the circular economy is mainly related to the value of those physical things, products, materials, and resources. And then the generation of waste, of course, don't exist, or exist as minimally as possible. This is also complemented by this interesting diagram from the European Environmental Agency, where they put, let's see the pointer, where they put in the, so where they put in the inner circle the strategies: reuse, repair, redistribute, refurbish, that will incentivize or will increase a circular economy. In this middle cycle, they put the supply chain of materials and products, where we have here the production of materials, the design of products, the production, manufacturing, then consumption, use, and end of life. And then creating a circle where the materials are used in this continuous loop. Together with this, they show that we should minimize then the extraction and import of natural resources and the emissions produced by these circles. These emissions would be related to waste emissions or to other environmental emissions, and also decrease incineration and landfill. Another approach that are similar is this famous diagram from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, where they put here in the middle the supply chain of materials and products, and then the use, and this dashed line where we should minimize the leakage of those materials, like with energy recovery and landfill. Don't minimize as much as possible these things. And to minimize this, we have those blue or green circles where they describe strategies that will relate with this supplying of materials with maintenance, reuse, redistribute, refurbish, recycle, and then in the biological cycles, similar things. However, circular economy, as I said before, is a rather large subject, and there is no such one definition of it. Several researchers or several people that work with circular economy, they have different understandings of what it means. This author, for instance, found more than 100 definitions of circular economy. And together with that, those different authors also have different understandings of how those materials cycle in society. And for that, circular economy, or the circularity of those materials, can be measured, for example, with one indicator that may have different answers. And then this is also difficult to understand. So with that in mind, we posed ourselves the questions. So if we have so many indicators, so many understandings of what circular economy is, what do then those circular economy indicators measure? To answer that question, we developed this framework, a classification framework, where we took from literature different indicators and we tried to put them in different boxes to understand what do they mean in front of circular economy. In the paper, we illustrate this framework with micro-scale indicators or with product indicators and macro-scale indicators. But today I will show just the macro-scale part because, of course, I think it's more relevant for your studies. So, establishing the classification framework, firstly. Seeing that it's so hard to understand what is exactly circular economy, then maybe it would be easier to understand what is then if we cannot see what is really circular economy grasping, what then is the minimum that circular economy it's about. One thing that we saw was that it's always related to the use of natural resources or to the minimization of the use of natural resources and the minimization of waste. With that, we have the circularity of materials and those this increasing of flows inside the society while minimizing waste and natural resources, especially, I'm trying to get the pointer again, and especially material resources, is through circular economy strategies. So then, what are those circular economy strategies? Here we have a few of the names that describe or try to describe those circular economy strategies, like reuse, repair, refuse, reduce, redesign, and so on. However, it's rather unclear as a circular economy what exactly those strategies mean. For example, reuse. Reuse, it's used by some authors as the reuse of a product. If we have, for example, a laptop, then we resell the laptop and somebody else's reuse it. It could be related to a part of this laptop. For instance, I don't know, the video board that can be reused by another computer. And for some other authors, it means to reuse the material inside this laptop. So if we have a reuse indicator and this reuse indicator is measuring somehow circular economy, it's not very clear if it is related to what inside this supply chains that I showed you before. So to better group those strategies, we propose then that instead of mentioning those R words like reuse, refuse, refurbished, we put them together in groups that are related to what actually they're measuring. And we saw that many indicators can measure products, or they can measure components, or they can measure materials, or they can measure the embodied energy that can be reused by the embodied energy in the material that can be reused. Additionally to those, there are some strategies that are not really related to those aspects, but to functions. Functions would be more related to, for example, disruptive technologies or product service systems or redesign, things like that. And another one is a reference scenario, because of course, as I said in the first, in one of the first slides, circular economy is also about the minimization of waste. So the reference scenario would be a reference to improve. So with that, we have 5 preservation capabilities: functions, products, components, materials, embodied energy, and 1 reference state. Also, I put here some examples of what those groups, of the strategies that those groups can be related to. For example, in functions, rethink, sharing economy, product service systems, products reuse, remanufacture, refurbish, and so on. Another thing is, okay, if we understand what are the circular economy strategies and understand that they are promoting circular economy and they are measured with the indicators, how then do those indicators measure, if they measure those strategies? We identified 3 scopes. Those scopes are related to first, scope 0 and 1 are related to first the technological cycle of physical things like products, components, materials. However, in the scope 0, we have a very close to one industry or one company measurement. For example, the waste generation doesn't say much about the cycles of the materials in society, but it says something about the specific stream of material that is being generated by this specific company. Or, for example, the recycled content of a specific product. It doesn't say much about how those material cycles, but it says something about the product. And then in the scope 1, we have a more comprehensive measurement of those materials in the production, in the use, and in the end of life, but still in a sense of the physical properties of those materials. In the scope 2, we have then those technological cycles measured by the effects that they may cause in society in a sense of the environment or the economy or in the social sense. So they are more burdens or benefits indicators, measuring then the cause and effect of those cycles. So to further illustrate those this framework and also to see if you understand what I said so far. I will make a small quiz with 3 questions. You can use the chat to answer. So, of course, not everyone will answer, but we can have more or less, we can see if you understand. So, for example, considering here the amount of considering that we have a house and we want to know the amount of recycled material that is embedded in the house, like the recycled contents. Would you say that this indicator, amount of recycled debris in a house, would be more level 0, level 1, or level 2? So it measured the technological cycles in a rather limited scope, in a scope that includes the cycle of this material in society, or it is more related to the effects of those materials in society? What do you think this indicator would be about? I see some people answering level 0, 1 people level 2, level 0, level 1, level 0. Yeah, so it's most answered right. It's a level 0 indicator. It doesn't say much about the cycle of the material, but it says something about this specific use of the materials material inside the product. For example, let's think in this house we have concrete that is used in columns and so on. We may have in the concrete debris from another site, like recycled stones and things like that. This don't say much about where these materials are coming from, if they will be recycled afterwards, but it says that, okay, in this concrete column we have 50% of recycled material. So it's a rather limited perspective. Another one, for example, these recycled content benefits from these authors says that it's an indicator measuring the avoided impacts by recycling, the use of recycling material, considering the overall environmental impacts in this case of a product. So we have here we have an amount of material, of course, but also we have the environmental effects and the cost effects and the societal effects of those recycled materials in the house. Which level then do you think it is related to? 0, 1, or 2? Yeah, everyone is answering apparently level 2. Yeah. Good. It is level 2. It's related to the impacts. Is not only about the flows of those materials, but the effects that these flows cause in society or in the environment. Another famous, this case, a very famous indicator from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. It's the linear flow index. This is part of their material circularity indicator. In this case, they're measuring the amount of recycled material in this house, for example, and the amount of unrecoverable material when this house is demolished. So, for example, we use here some recycled material, like recycled plastic in a window, and then when this house is used, and afterwards, in the end of life, this material can be reused or recycled, but in a different percentage. So from all those plastics, including recycled and non-recycled plastics that we use to build this the window in the house, some percentage can be still further used. Would you rather say this is a level 0, 1, or 2? Yeah, level 1. Most of the people, or everyone, is putting level 1. Exactly. It's not giving only an information about a specific part of the supply chain, but it's also giving an information about what it can happen when this use ends. So but it doesn't say much about the environmental impacts, for example, of using those recycled materials. So this ends the quiz. I'm happy that all of you, or most of you, answered correctly. And we can make them pause for questions, if we have any. If you have any.
Yes, if you have any questions, please just write. Okay, we have one. What about
legislation?
Yeah.
End of waste, when a waste is no longer defined as such, but becomes a raw secondary. Yeah, the legislation. Well, this framework aims to classify outputs and outcome indicators. Legislation would be, I would say, it would be rather an indicator measuring input information. So the promotion of the circular economy, not the output of the circular economy as such. We didn't focus on those type of indicators. This was actually one path of improvement of the framework, because it works for some input indicators, but not for all of them. And of course, legislation, it's not one that we focused. In any case, if it is related to the waste itself, then it would be a level 0 indicator measuring a reference scenario.
Okay, we have another question. When you talk about strategies for preservation capabilities and one reference state, I'm still a little fuzzy on what the reference state is. Could you please clarify?
Yeah. So the idea of circular economy is to leave a linear economy where we produce on the one hand we extract materials and then we extract the raw materials and then produce products and services, and then after this product is used, we put them in the trash. So it's a linear economy. The reference scenario for the circular economy is exactly this linearity, where we understand that one thing to avoid is waste generation. So waste is not is not really a strategy. Waste generation is not really a strategy, but to measure that is a way to show that strategies are might be working.
We have maybe time for a quick reply to two other questions. So the first one, how do you measure waste prevention, which is also part of the circular economy?
Yeah, this is more or less related to what I was saying before.
Yeah.
Sorry, do you want to say something?
Yeah. I mean, if you want to add something else, otherwise we have another one. So let's try the next one. Are the indicators of circular economy used in the balance sheet of firms? Do they have an effect on enterprises' profitability? Which I think is more.
Yeah, do you have like an example of those indicators? This
very specific example.
Yeah, it's
I think
very specific.
maybe yes. You can formulate again the questions for the next break. While we have another question, I suggest the last question for this break. While I ask him to Stefania to maybe give us some example. So the last question, you gave an example earlier about a laptop being resold and reused or sold for its parts. Does that mean that this economy strategy relies on having a strong basis of people with poor economic status?
Not necessarily. Well, this is a discussed thing among different authors of circular economy, because some of the strategies may also may incentivize circular economy in a sense, but it may also promote side effects. For example, the reuse of cars from Europe in developing countries, or things like that, the promotion of the use or reuse of used cell phones by people that don't have enough money to buy a new one. Well, is this a good thing? It is a bad thing? I don't know. I cannot say. The idea of the framework was to rather classify what is there than to say this is better to measure, this is worse to measure. But yes, it's an issue that's it's still under research, in my understanding.
Okay, so I suggest to continue now with the presentation. We will have another break. I think it's like, not so many slides. Okay, so.
Yes, okay.
Go.
So now we have developed the framework to classify those indicators. I will briefly show then the illustration case. Firstly, mentioning the European Commission Circular Economy Monitoring Framework, where they present those 10 indicators to measure circular economy. The indicators that they proposed are divided in 4 themes: production and consumption, waste management, secondary raw materials, and competitiveness and innovation. Overall, they say it is there are 10 indicators divided in those groups. However, they also have some of the indicators also have sub-indicators, which means overall they measure around 20 trends. So we'll see a brief overview of all of them. So in the production and consumption, they proposed 4 indicators. The self-sufficiency for raw materials, where they measure the reliance of critical raw materials in the European Commission and in countries. The green public procurement, that is not, it's just mentioned, but it's not really developed. They don't have an indicator yet for that. Then waste generation. divided in 3 indicators: the municipal waste per capita, the total waste, municipal and industrial waste, per gross domestic product, and per domestic material consumption. Then the other indicator is the food waste, that also it's under development. In the waste management team, they have then the recycling rates with municipal waste and overall waste, and then per waste stream, where they have 3 indicators for packaging, recycling rates of overall packaging, and then divided by only plastic packaging and wood packaging, and then recycling rate of e-waste and bio-waste and construction and demolition waste. For secondary raw materials, they have the contribution of recycled materials to the raw materials demand, and then they have 2 sub-indicators: end of life recycling input rate and the circular material use rate. The 8th indicator is related to the trade, so imports inside Europe and imports and exports inside Europe, I mean outside Europe in this case, and then inside Europe. And lastly, the competitiveness and innovation, where one indicator is the private investment, jobs, and gross value added related to circular economy sectors. Then they have 3 indicators: gross investments in tangible goods, number of persons employed, and value added at factor cost. And lastly, the number of patents related to recycling and secondary raw materials. Just mentioning in the 9, those indicators, they are, well, I'll show you that later, but all those indicators are already in other European frameworks, but in this case, they just measure they separated the measurements by sectors of things that they consider to be circular economy. So overall, then we have here in this red area the 10 indicators from the circular economy framework. They're published by Eurostat, and the relation with other frameworks. For example, the resource efficiency scoreboard, that's composed by 14 indicators in the Eurostat, where they connect with some of those indicators. Then the waste framework directive also connected to some of those indicators. The raw materials scoreboard also connected to some of them, and then those 2 are the under development indicator that are also being developed to attend the measurement of sustainable development goals. Now a small break. Do you have any more questions?
Okay, let's see. Any questions on this last part?
Or in the part before? I don't know.
Yeah, of course. Otherwise, we can. Oh, man, could you please say again what self-efficiency for raw materials is?
It's not self-efficiency, self-sufficiency. It's a measurement of the, I think the correct name is the reliance on imported materials. So it's an indicator that says from this, for a specific critical raw material, such as cobalt. I think cobalt is a critical raw material. How reliable is Europe to get this material? This is a relation of importing this material to Europe, because it might have trading issues, or the country might not be stable, so the supplying of this material may not be self-sufficient.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Otherwise, we go on with the last part of the presentation. Okay, one definition of waste. Is it harmonized in the EU?
As far as I understand, the indicators for waste are harmonized among the waste agencies that produce this data. As far as I understand, yes, they are harmonized.
Okay, good, thank you. So I think we can go on with the last part, and then of course, please continue to pose questions if you have, and we'll have a final discussion.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I will show you the results of then the framework that we developed with the indicators that I showed you from the European Commission. So here we have basically a table. In this area we have the groups where we put the circular economy strategy, so the functions, products, components, materials, embodied energy, and reference. So those first 5 are the preservation strategies, and then the reference scenario. And then here on the top we have the measurement scopes that we made the quiz, scope 0, 1, and 2. So remembering, scope 0 is about the technological cycles, but with a rather limited life cycle thinking. The scope 1 is also about the technological cycles, but with a more comprehensive view of the cycles of the flows of materials. And scope 2, it's about the cause and effects of those materials in a sense of environment or economy or society. We see that, first of all, another thing that is important to mention is that you see the indicator here, it's in black or red. The difference between red and black is that the red are more proxy measure. They are not really measuring the circular economy, but they measure an approximation of what circular economy means, and by that they show some results that are related to circular economy but are not yet to the point. That's why I mentioned the investment, jobs, and added value before, because they measure some areas that are related to circular economy, but they restrict the aspects of circular economy too much, and they don't include others. For example, circular economy might be related to the design of products, and this area is not included in the private investments, for example. But it would be in the companies that use or that process waste or recycle waste. So this is the difference between black and red. And also you see in between brackets there is a number. This number is related to the sub-indicators, let's say. So self-sufficiency has just one number, or just one indicator, and recycling rates, in this case, they are divided in 2 recycling rates for electronic products, and the other recycling rates. This one is it's a bit more complicated indicator because it measures also components and materials. But okay, as a general overview of the results, we see that most of them measure the materials with strategies such as recycling. So yeah, most of them are here. Another thing that I forgot to mention is that some indicators are mentioned in several parts of the framework. This means that those indicators are capable to measure either products or components or materials, or in this case, the reference scenario. And this is because, in this case, because of the division of the areas that they measured. Another finding is that, considering the indicators from the European Commission, they don't really measure functions and products in a direct way. Only this indicator that is not really well, it measures something, but it has its limitations. And most of the indicators are also with a limited view of the cycles of the material. So they include the recycling rates, the waste generation, the self-sufficiency that is not really to the point of the circular economy, but well, it's a relevant information. But there are some other indicators like the indicator 8, contribution to raw materials, 7, sorry, that have a more broad scope. Also, in the sense of the scope 2, so they don't really measure the circular economy in this scope, only by indirect indicators. So as a conclusion of this illustration, we see that the indicators are built from existing knowledge, which means that they're not really developed to measure circular economy. I think because they understood that this is possible to measure, because it's such a debatable area that they thought, okay, it's possible then to measure with some of the other indicators that they have already. A clear and strong focus on materials, however, still some promise to measure functions and products with the indicators that are in development. It's very interesting that energy recovery is not relevant to the European indicators for circular economy, which I think it's a good thing. So they rather want to preserve the materials that are there. They're not measuring if those materials are becoming energy afterwards. And the indicators have a rather narrow life cycle perspective, as I showed before. So as a conclusion, then we have this, we show this proposal to classify output and outcome indicators. It's also very clear that single indicators might not be sufficient to measure all aspects of circular economy, because well, it's first difficult to grasp, and second, it's a complicated area, I would say. So it's one indicator, it's not enough. And additionally, as an additional perspective, I will just briefly show one other possible way to measure circular economy in a more regional sense. So this is a published paper by the Policy Research Center, where we try to build a bridge in between micro and macro indicators. Knowing that macro indicators are useful to policymaking, however, as they are measured along the time, they show trends. They don't really give a fast feedback to policy. They take some time to show the trend. On the other hand, we have micro indicators that are very fast to show possible trends and possible changes. However, they are related to one product or one service. They are not really relevant to policymaking in a sense of the product itself. And then, however, we could show indicators, something in between those two, with indicators measuring societal needs or the fulfillment of societal needs. Those societal needs would be, for example, mobility or housing or nutrition, and they would be an aggregation of those indicators that show the products or services that are fulfilling this societal need. So the mobility, for instance, the amount of car sharing, or the increase of public transportation and things like that. If you're interested in knowing more, then I invite you to read the paper. It's published on the Policy Research Center website, so you can have a check there later. And with that, I conclude the presentation. I thank you very much for your attention and ask you, do you have any more questions?
Yes, of course, we can have some minutes more for some final question. Okay, we have one. If we'd like to learn further about circular economy, which online or textbook materials you recommend that come to your mind?
Well, one source of information is the Policy Research Center website. There you have there you have some information. Even we are trying to develop a blog to put some well, not so related to research subjects, but still related to circular economy. I would say that it's very interesting to read the European Commission Action Plan for Circular Economy. This was published in 2015. If you're interested in the indicators itself, then I would advise you to read the report about the indicators. Yeah.
Another one. So given the fact that energy production and distribution is a process that requires a lot of money, manpower, and the resources in general, and also the fact that it is important to every aspect of life, how it is possible to say that EU doesn't care about its recovery and the recycling of it? Isn't it useful for the system to come up with a way to preserve the energy, thus limiting the waste and the resources wasted to produce it?
No, well, the conclusion was not exactly that the European doesn't care about the recovery and recycling of energy production. Well, doesn't care about the energy production, but that they don't measure the energy produced by materials. For instance, the energy recovered by waste materials. You know that heat power plants, they can use waste as a way to produce energy, so as their feedstock. And some authors mention that energy recovery is a way, or can be a way, to incentivize at least a bit circular economy. It doesn't say, I'm not saying here that they don't care about energy production. I'm just saying that they are not measuring the waste, the energy generated with waste inputs.
Okay, thank you. And we have another question about the classification of raw materials in primary and secondary, because some raw materials, I mean, it's not possible to find some raw materials in Europe. So maybe, I mean, just a classification based on the, from where the raw materials come. I don't know if it's something that is taken into account.
From where? Yes, in the self-sufficiency indicator, it's something that they consider because, well, especially for critical raw materials, they want to know if they have enough supply of those materials. In the case of what is primary, what is secondary, yes, of course, they have a definition of that for the materials. And what else? Yeah, I don't know if this really answers the question.
Yeah, I think in any case it's a reference to the questions. And so, any other questions to our speaker? Otherwise, I think, oh yeah, one. Are the statistical data about indicators to be unique for measuring on the Europe level? So maybe you're asked if the data source is the same for all Europe. Not sure.
Yeah, if the data sources are the same, well, they are measured in similar ways. I understand the National Statistics Agency from each country produced the data to send them to the Eurostat.
So they are harmonized.
Yeah, so they should be harmonized, but I don't really know the specifics of how they do that about the specific details of this harmonization, but I understand that yes, they are harmonized.
Okay, any other questions? No, so I think we can close the session. So thank you, Gustavo, for this really interesting and insightful lecture. And of course, many thanks to all our participants who joined us from many different places. You can already download the presentation, as I was saying, from the EMOS 2020 events website, where the recording of the webinar will be also available as soon as possible. In the meantime, I kindly ask you to check the inbox of the email account that you use for registering to the webinar, as you have already received the link to a short survey about today's webinar. We'd really appreciate your feedback to further improve our webinars. So the next webinar is scheduled for next Tuesday, the 10th of March, where Natalie Slomo from the University of Manchester will be presenting on statistical disclosure control. Where do we go from here? So thank you, everybody, again. Thank you, Gustavo, and have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Caterina, for the invitation. Thank you, everyone, for your attention, and have a nice evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.